Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Like Stars podcast with me, Pete Goodman. I am excited to dive into another topic with you today as we continue our discussions week in, week out about wisdom and the life that God is offering. Decided on this episode to just take it easy. I've been covering some really heavy stuff, and someone said, Pete, what are you doing on this one? I said, I'm just going to very comfortable, simple topic. Somebody asked, Pete, what's the deal with Christians and guns? And I'm like, sure, let's tackle that one. So that's what we're going to get into. It's going to be a great episode, I hope. I think that maybe when it's over, I'll still have some friends, but if not, so be it. Do I even have any anyways? Hey, before we dive into this huge question, a couple quick things. First, if you're listening on audio, whether it's on Apple or Spotify or whichever, make sure first and foremost that you subscribe so you get a notification every time a new episode comes out. And if you get a chance, I'd love for you to jump on there and just rate the podcast. Give it some stars, and maybe if you have anything good to say. If you don't have anything good to say, then just shut your mouth. But a rating would actually really help. It kind of pushes it out to more people, let them see it, and decide whether they want to listen. If you are watching me on YouTube, thank you so much. Again, make sure you subscribe to the Like Stars YouTube channel, both so you can get notifications when a new episode comes out, but also just let you know there's other stuff on the YouTube channel, other messages I've given, preaching things, and a little teaser. I am currently in the works of developing an entire New Testament survey course of videos that will walk you through every book of the New Testament, giving background, insight. I'm working through that, a little over halfway done, and that's all going to be available on the Like Stars YouTube channel here in the next probably 3 or 4 weeks. So be looking for that, and make sure you subscribe so you can check it out when it goes live. And then this episode of the Like Stars podcast, we got to make that paper, son. Here's your sponsor. The sponsor this episode is complaining about the weather in San Diego. Yes, I live in San Diego, and the sponsor for this episode is people who complain about the weather. Now, just for some clarity, I moved here from the Midwest about maybe 10 years ago. Got here and realized that flyover country where I grew up wasn't quite the same. And I remember in the early stages of living here, when I would hear local San Diegans complain when it rained a little bit, oh, water's falling from the sky. Or they would have this period of a couple months where it was kind of cloudy. It's the June gloom. It's so terrible. And I would be like, shut your faces, people. None of you will ever understand the pure joy of walking to school in frigid sub-zero temperatures where it's so cold that snot is literally like crystallizing on your face. And when you get to school, you have to pry it off with a pencil. I'm sorry that you got a little gloomy in May. Come on, people. Hearing people complain about the weather in San Diego when I first got here, it's like billionaires whining about getting lost in their 20-bedroom mansion. Shut up already. And then I realized about 10 years later, I found myself complaining. I've been waking up lately and being like, it's so cloudy here. And ooh, it's chilly. I've had to put on a sweater almost every day. I have become that which I have hated, the circle of life. Oh, complaining about the weather in San Diego. You are so obnoxious. But you're now part of my life, and so you are the sponsor of this episode of the Like Stars podcast. Thank you so much for contributing nothing. All right, let's dive into our topic. What is the deal with Christians and guns? Now, that's actually not the way this question came to me. In fact, over the past few months and maybe longer, I've had a couple of different questions raising from violence, and we talked about that a little bit in a previous episode. There was a question on episode 18 I covered about whether Christians should serve in the military or be willing to die for their country. Touched on that. You can go back and listen to it. This is going to kind of pick up on that a little bit. But I had two very specific questions came in, and both of them were related to passages in the Bible that people found confusing. First, somebody asked about a passage in Matthew chapter 20, starting verse 34, where Jesus tells his disciples, blatantly says, hey, don't think I've come for peace. I have actually come with a sword. And it's like, wait, what? And you need to there's going to be war and fighting, and you got to hate your father and mother, which was always, when I was a youth pastor, my students' favorite verse for the wrong reasons. But the person said, what's the deal here? You didn't come for peace? I thought he was the Prince of Peace. What's going on? And then there's another confusing passage that a different person asked about in Luke 22, where Jesus is talking to his disciples and he's sending them out. And he says, if you don't have a sword, sell everything you own and go buy a sword. And you're like, wait, what? And it's like, what is Jesus telling us? And so both of these passages are really kind of getting at the same thing and are things that people have wrestled with. How are we to make sense of statements that almost seem kind of contradictory to other things we read, calling us to peace, loving our enemies? So the question is basically this: which is it? Does Jesus want us owning and using weapons and fighting? Or was he a pacifist who's called us to love and forgive and lay our weapons down? And if so, how do we explain these verses? So I'm going to talk through both of these passages on this episode, and they're both going to kind of lead to the same place, I think. But we'll actually see that I can't quite directly lump them together because both of them have a slightly different context. And so I'll talk about them separately, but we'll kind of land the plane at the same place, if that makes sense. We'll start with the verse in Matthew about him not coming for peace, but a sword. And then I'll talk about the passage in Luke separately about selling your cloak and buying a sword. So, you with me? Before I do, I need to throw out this disclaimer to all of my friends. Some of you I'm close with that listen to this podcast. Others, maybe I don't know as well, but you've found this different places. I need you all to just pause real quick and listen to this disclaimer. What I'm about to talk about is me working through these passages as best that I can, is what I think these passages mean, what I think the Bible's saying. It is not me having a bone to pick. This is not an issue I have some big passion behind or something. What I'm about to say is not me trying to get on a soapbox and tell you if you disagree, you're stupid, you're wrong. This is an open-handed issue that Christians can disagree on, like a lot of the things we talked about. If you agree or disagree with my take on guns or that kind of stuff, it's okay. We can still be friends and love each other, all right? But please know, primarily what I want to do is I want to talk about the verses themselves and what the passages mean. And then we can have a short conversation about what I personally actually think about things like violence or guns and things. Okay? All right. A few episodes ago, episode 18 called Homelands and Homeworlds or something like that. You can check it out. I answered the question of, should Christians be willing to die for their country? And in that episode, I talked about the difference between what I saw in the Bible as calling Christians in Romans 13. Paul is calling Christians to allow the government to handle things like vengeance and protection things, like you don't need to do it. And so my point in that message was, in that podcast, I think what Paul was getting at was saying, when it comes to, committing violence, punishing wicked, fighting wars, it's not necessarily that the Bible is saying don't do it, as much as Paul is saying, let the government handle it. So if you work for the government, if you're in the military, police, whatever. So you can go back and listen to that episode. Hopefully a lot of you already have, and it'll give you more context to where I'm coming from. But I think to make sense of that passage, I still have to talk about these verses. So we're going to start in Matthew chapter 10, verse 34. And I'm just going to read it for you, especially for those listening on the podcast. It says this: Jesus says, "Do not suppose I have come to bring peace on earth." Wait, what? Isn't that exactly why you came? I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. I have come to turn, and then there's quotes, a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. Ooh, you're going to fight with your family. Anyone who loves their father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Anyone who loves their son or daughter of me is not worthy of me. He goes on talking about carrying your cross. What in the world is Jesus talking about here? So he didn't come for peace. He's not the Prince of Peace. He's not actually wanting peace and love and kindness. He came with a sword. And he wants us to fight with our family members and hate our parents. What is happening here? Okay, let's break this passage down and talk about the context of it and how it fits within the overall story of the New Testament. There are two important things that you need to know to properly understand and interpret what Jesus is saying here, as well in other similar type places. First, and I've talked about this in other places. Some of you listen to my Church Rise Cities Digging Deeper podcast. I touched on it a bit in there. The first is this: what we see in the Old Testament is that God sent prophets to Israel to tell them to change, to tell them they need to change their ways or God is going to show up and deal with them. And at the very end of the Old Testament, the very last passage of the Old Testament in Malachi, there's a verse which essentially says, God's going to give you one more chance. He's going to send someone like Elijah. And Elijah will either, and we see this, turn the hearts of the children back to the fathers, repair, restore relationships, or that's it. And it's going to be judgment. It's game over for Israel. Now, when Jesus shows up, what we see is Jesus actually tells us, when they say, like, wasn't Elijah supposed to come? Jesus basically says John the Baptist basically was that Elijah. He was the one who came and called you all to repent. He was the voice in the wilderness saying, Israel, you've led astray. You're no longer living the way I've called you to live. You're not doing what you're supposed to do. Turn and repent, or fire is coming. Judgment is coming. Someone is coming after me who is you're not going to like what happens here. Which I can kind of mess with it. Wait a minute. That's Jesus, what? In fire? What? Yes. So when Jesus picks up this idea, starting here in chapter 10, we see that Jesus saw himself not as the Elijah who would be their one last chance. Jesus saw himself as, in some ways, regarding Israel as judgment, as God's judgment. And in this passage, here's the important thing about this passage. I told you that the whole thing about turning fathers against kids was in quotes. Jesus is quoting from another Old Testament prophet named Micah. And in Micah chapter 7, where he's quoting from, we read this. Micah chapter 7 is the prophet Micah complaining about Israel. He's basically like, we are supposed to be God's people and we're terrible. We're doing all these terrible things. We mistreat each other. This is all, like, when did we become so horrible? And in verse 4 of chapter 7, Micah says, the best of them is like a briar, meaning like even the best of us Israelites are even bad. The most upright, worse than a thorn hedge. There's no good among us. We've all turned astray. And then he says this, the day God visits you is come. The day your watchmen sound the alarm. Why would watchmen sound an alarm if God was just showing up for a picnic? When you say watchmen sound an alarm, it's like war. There's an army at your gates. When God comes to visit you, it's not going to be a good day for you. Now is the time of your confusion. He's like, now is the time when things are going to get difficult. So Micah is prophesying and saying, God is going to come to us. And when he comes to us, it's not going to be a good day. The day of the Lord is going to be rough because we have not been faithful, because we have not been true to what God told us to do and what God commanded of us. We have been wicked and bad. The best of us are bad. So when God shows up, it's not going to be, hey guys, I'm here. It's going to be, what have you done, you wicked servants? The owner is returning to the vineyard and he's not happy and he's not pleased with how you've been handling things. And there's going to be some retribution. So when Jesus picks up on Micah or the end of Malachi, the Father returning, all these kind of things, Jesus, now this is the key here. He is not speaking worldwide. His statement about not bringing peace but a sword is not saying my overall mission was to bring war to the earth. In this moment, he's speaking about Israel. He is speaking as a prophet and judge over his own people. The king has returned. Now, here's the thing. Remember what Micah said. The day God visits you, who's Jesus? God in human flesh. God has visited you. The day has just happened. God is now returning. Emmanuel, God with us. God is showing up. And like Micah said, it wasn't going to be peaceful and easy and kind. The day God shows up, your watchmen should sound an alarm because things are about to get bad. And so Matthew 24 picks this up where Jesus basically says the whole temple is going to get destroyed. The whole system's going to be undone. And all of your followers are going to be persecuted. Jerusalem is eventually destroyed about 30 years later. So there's this side of Jesus which had a global, I'm coming to save the world, yes, but first there was a side of Jesus that said God's initial plan to save the world through the Jewish people has not gone the way God wanted it to. And so Jesus is coming, the son is returning now to the vineyard that he owns and saying, we're fixing this has not gone well, you've abused the garden, and I'm throwing you people out, metaphorically. So when Jesus says, I haven't come for peace but a sword, who is he talking to? Not the whole world. Not, I have come to start World War III. I guess that would have been World War I. He's saying, when it comes to the Jewish people, when it comes to you and your community, I didn't come for peace. John the Baptist came for peace. He came and offered and said, hey, it's not too late. You can still turn. You killed him. You chopped his head off. Now I'm here and you're going to kill me too. So there's this whole idea of like, me showing up is not, yay us. Me showing up is, like the owner showed up and he's not happy with what we've been doing to the business while he was gone. So there's that side of Jesus' ministry. Then there's also the side of what he's saying that's speaking to his own followers, the people who've chosen to follow him despite the fact that he has harsh things for Israel. And for these people, Jesus wants to say, following me is not going to be easy. Like they killed John the Baptist. Guess what? They're going to kill me. So if you're my followers, this isn't going to be easy. There's actually going to be this is going to be tough. And this was common among the Jewish people, that they believed that before things got better, a great time of suffering would come. Now, did they think it would be their own suffering because of their own sin? That's a whole other issue. But for Jesus, he was saying, listen, I know that what you wanted was for the Messiah to come and snap his fingers and everything was going to be better. Like peace, everything, shalom, we're great. He's like, no, in fact, me showing up completely contrary to how most people wanted me to show up means they're not going to accept me, so they're not going to accept you. So I didn't come to make all your lives simple and easy. In fact, and this is the key, I think, when he says, but a sword, Jesus didn't mean I came for you to pick up a sword. It was more like saying a sword will be drawn because of me. Swords will be drawn. Blood will be spilled because people will not accept who I am and what I'm doing. And a lot of that blood being spilled will be yours as my followers. So if it's going to be hard, if it's going to be tough, if it's going to be difficult, your own family members are going to turn against you. It is so important that you have really thought through what you're getting into. Are you sure you want to follow me? And so Jesus then makes this very outlandish statement that you need to hate your father and mother compared to me. He wasn't literally saying like, don't like your parents. He was saying in that culture, the most important loyalty you could possess was to your parents. The only person you could give more loyalty to than your parents and your family was God himself. And Jesus is saying, God has visited you and he's demanding your utmost loyalty. So as things get difficult, as trials come, as people start threatening your lives and things start falling apart and things don't work out the way that the Jewish people wanted them to, they're going to come after you just like they came after me. I didn't come to instantly make it easy and simple. It's actually going to get very difficult. And if you want to see it through, if you want to follow me, you have to be so completely committed to me that I'm more important than your very family, because some of your family members are going to turn on me. And if your family is more important than me, you're going to give up and walk away with them when it gets difficult. And when trials come up. So Jesus isn't encouraging violence on their end. He's saying it's going to be violent. It's going to be bad. So get ready. Violence is coming your way, basically. Don't think me showing up means everything's going to be easy and peaceful. They're literally going to kill me and then do the same to you. So be warned. Make sure you're fully committed. I need to be the most important priority in your life when things really hit the fan and the sword comes instead of peace and prosperity and all these things that you wanted in me. Again, it doesn't mean that Jesus doesn't ultimately want goodness for our lives. It just meant that when he first showed up, and we've seen it, right? It's been 2,000 years. Following Jesus can be difficult because there are people that don't accept it. The full, completed age to come when everything is peaceful and shalom and remade has not yet come. And Jesus wanted us to know and understand that. It will come when he returns again, but until then, we're still in this time where the sword is still part of the life. Again, it doesn't mean Jesus was telling you and I to own a sword and kill people. He was saying, this is the world you're going to live in because people don't like me. They're going to fight. It's going to be a problem and you might suffer and be persecuted for it. Okay. So that's the context of Matthew 10. Now let's take all that and move to Luke 22:36. Jesus is sending out his disciples to go and start evangelizing and preach and call people to join. And it says this in verse 36. He says to them, but now if you have a purse, take it, in a bag. If you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. So buy a sword. For it is written, end quote, he was numbered among the transgressors. And I tell you that this must be fulfilled in me. Yes, what is written about me is reaching its fulfillment. So Again, we're kind of back here again. Wait a minute. Hold on, Pete. Okay, maybe this isn't talking about persecution. This isn't talking about other people fighting me. Jesus is saying we need to buy swords. Like it says it right there. Sell your cloak and buy one. So Pete, how do you get around? Like this verse seems to suggest that Jesus wants us to be armed. And in truth, this verse has often been used that way. For a lot of the church's history, Christians have used a verse like this to affirm the importance of being armed, Second Amendment, all those kind of things. And maybe we'll come back to that here after I walk through this verse. But let me, apart from what you think about the Second Amendment, owning guns, put all that on pause. Okay, put all that on pause. Take a deep breath. Is he gonna trample my rights? What is he? I don't know. Just take a deep breath and let's talk about what Jesus is actually saying in this passage, okay? Forget about that stuff. Let's just talk about what the Bible means for a moment. Here's the short answer. I want to point something out. If Jesus was telling his disciples, I want you guys to all go buy swords and be armed and get ready for war, there's a few problems with that interpretation. It seems, I get it, on the surface, it kind of seems like he's saying that. But here's the problem. Let me give you three things. Number one, let's be honest, it would make Jesus just a little bit schizophrenic. Jesus told these same people that blessed are the peacemakers in Matthew 5:9. The Greek pacifist, it's where we get the word pacifist. And it's not a passive, it's actively working for peace. It's trying to create peace and justice. It's trying to work for an end to violence and murder, all these kind of things. Jesus said, don't resist an evil person. If they slap you on the face, turn the other cheek, right? How do you reconcile that with go buy a sword and defend yourself and kill people? That's where we get the idea of non-resistance. And let's not forget, Jesus said, you've heard it said to love your neighbor and hate your enemy. I say love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. This is the same guy who wants us carrying swords around and fighting and killing and all these kind of things. It seems like he's kind of like, is he got two thoughts here? Did he change his mind? Did he say all that stuff at the beginning and then later on was like, you know what? Forget all that. This is getting violent. Go get your swords, guys. And these ideas are picked up and repeated again throughout the New Testament, though, by his followers. And that's the key, because if he changed his mind and he actually, by the end, wanted them to fight, they completely missed it. Because Christians were staunch pacifists for the next 3 centuries. For the first 300 years of the church, Christians would not engage in warfare. The early Christian church was extremely anti-violence pacifist, all the way up until Augustine, who was part of the initial Christian empire that we discussed back in episode 18. You see guys like Justin Martyr, who wrote early on, he said, we who formerly murdered one another now refrain from making war even on our enemies. Justin Martyr said that. Tertullian, an early church father, said the Christian does no harm even to his enemy. Ambrose, an early church father, said it's better to suffer wrong than inflict it. We would rather shed our own blood than stain our hands and our conscience with that of another. Clement of Alexandria said Christians are not allowed to use violence to correct the delinquencies of sin. Athenagoras said, we have learned not to return blow for blow. Instead, even those who strike us on the side of the face, we offer the other side also. So if Jesus changed his mind about violence and weapons and war later on in his ministry, his followers didn't think so. His followers were doggedly anti-violence and they didn't carry weapons. They didn't fight in wars. Now that did shift at about 350 AD, and we talked about that in the last episode. And we talked about the reasons why it shifted when it became more of a governmental issue. All of these guys I just quoted were talking about personal. We're talking about in their own lives. They weren't talking about whether or not a person should be in the military. The early Christians often avoided serving in Roman military, but that wasn't so much a pacifist issue as much as Rome was paganism and they didn't want to be a part of it. They were talking about your own personal life, which aligns again with what I said in that last episode. Even Tertullian was against Christians joining the military because it was supporting paganism and Rome's sort of evil agenda, not necessarily because he believed there was never a moment when a police force or military force had intervened. They are talking about us in our own lives, which is important because that's what I'm talking about. We've already dealt with whether or not Christians should or shouldn't be a part of the military police force. different podcast. Here, I'm more talking about in your own life. What's the deal with Christians needing to own guns, talking about all the self-defense, all the kind of language? Where is Jesus at with that? And we see that Jesus didn't seem to support it very much, and the early church clearly didn't support it either. And then there's even the text itself. So there's this moment when, after Jesus makes this statement about go and get a sword, the disciples respond by saying, look, Jesus, here's 2 swords. And what does Jesus say? That's enough. That's enough? Okay, we're talking about the text here, right? We're trying to read the text. What do you mean that's enough? If Jesus was trying to raise an army and wanted all of us to be armed, how could 2 swords be enough? In fact, and this is conjecture, okay? I'm conjecturing. It's hard to know exactly you don't know Jesus' tone of voice. You weren't there. All you see is the words. But when you read it in context, it doesn't look like Jesus is saying 2 swords is going to be enough. Oh yeah, Rome's going to come with their mighty legions and siege the city. Your 2 swords will be just fine, guys. No, I thought he was saying. It more sounds like an exasperated, guys, that's enough. Almost like you completely missed my point. Enough, right? That's more how it seems to be coming across. So seeing this as Jesus calling us to arm ourselves is actually, in my opinion, an example of kind of missing the point, just like they missed the point. I think his disciples missed the point, and those of us that use this passage to justify, arming up ourselves and stuff are also kind of missing the point. And here's the idea. Jesus is quoting another Old Testament passage here, and it's an important passage here. And I think that's the whole key to this. So let's look at the passage again. After he says this about story, he says, it is written. And then when he says it is written, he then quotes the prophet Isaiah. And Isaiah has this prophecy that's important to know about. And in the prophecy, Isaiah is speaking about the suffering servant, the coming Messiah. And he uses this phrase, and this is so key. He says this, it is written, he was numbered with and the NIV Bible translates it as transgressors. The word is anomos, the lawless, the ones who are outside of the law. And then Jesus says, I tell you that this must be fulfilled in me. What is written about me is reaching its fulfillment. Now, pay attention to this. Jesus is saying that prophecy about the Messiah needs to come true and be fulfilled. What was the prophecy? It wasn't just that Jesus was going to be a bad person. In fact, what's happening here, being numbered among the lawless, is about being wrongly accused of a crime. You're being considered lawless. You're being considered somebody who's outside of the law, someone that's trying to start a revolution and wage war against the government and pick up swords, but you're actually being wrongly accused of that. So Jesus is actually doing the opposite. He is saying we should put our swords on right now because they're going to accuse me of starting an insurrection, even though I'm not. They're going to count me among the lawless. And so Peter is talking a big game about starting a revolution. And Jesus points out that he's actually not going to start a violent revolution. It's not why he's here. In fact, he's going to die having been accused. What he's accused of and convicted of and executed for is being among the lawless, as being someone that was out to start a revolution and spill blood, which in fact, he was never out for. So Jesus is actually saying, go ahead and get a sword because they were going to accuse me of it anyway. I'm going to be wrongly accused of starting an insurrection. And the very context of carrying swords here is being lawless, revolutionaries fighting the government, picking up arms illegally. So Jesus is actually doing the opposite, using this passage to justify rebellion, raising up an army or a militia to fight your government. Listen, I'm an American and I like being American, and I'm glad for myself and my family that the American Revolution happened. But you can't use this passage to defend what the American colonialists did, picking up swords and saying they're doing it. Luke, Jesus said to pick up swords. No, Jesus was saying, that's not what I came for, but they're going to accuse me of it and convict me of it. So go ahead and pick up the swords in order for the prophecy to be fulfilled. And what happens when they actually come to arrest him and Jesus pulls out his sword and cuts a man's ear off? Jesus heals his enemy. And Jesus says, why have you come to me with clubs and sticks and swords as if I'm leading an insurrection? I'm not. But Isaiah prophesied that you would accuse me of it. So here we are. Let's do this. So am I a pacifist? Am I against the use of violence ever? No, I'm not. And we talked about episode 18. And again, I would encourage you, if you're like, wait a minute, Pete, what are you saying? Go back and listen to that episode if you missed it. I believe that there's a time and a place. There's a right time and a right place for a dispassionate, neutral, governing body to carry the sword or the gun or whatever in order to keep its people safe and punish wickedness, law, things like that. I understand the time. So if you're in the military, you're a police officer, this conversation isn't even about you, okay? This conversation is more about me. I'm just a random guy, right? Like I just live my life. Does Jesus want me to be all about guns and killing and defending myself? Am I anti-gun? Oh, you've been listening now for like 30 minutes wondering, what's Pete gonna say? Is he opposed to the Second Amendment? Is he anti-American? Well, okay. I got a few minutes here. So let's just go ahead and dive into this. Again, we are now walking into Pete's opinion land. I've showed you what I think the Bible teaches, but now we're in my opinion. Am I pro or anti-gun? It's a hard question, and I'm going to straddle the fence and say yes and no. Probably because I don't want all of you to hate me. No, I'm kidding. Listen, let me start here, and I'm just going to be blunt about this. And some of you are my friends, and you disagree. It's okay. I will say that I find America's fascination with guns odd, and I'm not comfortable with how we seem to almost celebrate them. Look, I love action movies. They're fun. They're exciting. But they're movies, they're fiction. In real life, what are we doing? Like, why are we so excited about guns? Guns are machines that we have created to kill people. Oh, they're for hunting. Guns were not created for hunting. Guns were created for war. The fact that they can kill animals is helpful, but that's not why they were made. Gunpowder was created in an attempt to win wars. Again, you're like, oh, Pete's opposed to guns. I'm not going there. I'm more interested in our attitude towards guns. Am I opposed to guns in general? I don't know. Maybe not. But I just find Christians' love of guns to be strange. Why are we so passionate about something that's core purpose is killing and wounding and harming when our Savior literally told us the opposite? Why are we so passionate about defending our rights and, oh, I got to have a gun because if the government ever tries to turn on me, I'm going to kill people? Are you? Well, is that what Jesus told you to do? I'm actually would be more than fine living in a society where guns weren't part of our lives. And the only people that had them were the ones responsible for keeping peace. However, and now this is where I'll meet some of you where you're at. I know that's unrealistic, especially where we're at in our country. I actually lead the security team of my church. I oversee it. And I'm glad that many of the men who serve on that come to our church carrying guns because it's a sad situation that they have to. But man, if someone comes in and wants to shoot my children, I'm glad one of those guys have a gun. But in that instance, I think I'm back to Romans 13. I think I'm back to saying there are certain people that we are going to appoint to take care of us and protect us. Does that mean I need to carry one? Does that mean I need to celebrate them and shoot them off? Like, I gotta love my guns. I don't know. I think it's probably unrealistic to go backwards. But I also wonder, have we created this mess? Because we were so obsessed with having our rights and protecting our rights that now we live in a world that everybody has these guns and just shoot anybody they want to. And we need armed security in our churches. When Jesus was saying, what if we undid that old mess? What if we stopped killing each other, stopped glorifying violence, stopped thinking the answer to everything was fighting and killing and murdering? And again, I know I'm stepping on some of your toes, and maybe that's okay. Listen, this podcast isn't for me just to tell you all the things that you want to hear. And it's not maybe what I might say on a church service where it's more like me trying to meet people where they're at. This is just me giving you my thoughts. This is my personal podcast. I'm not saying thus saith the Lord. I could be wrong about this. But look, I recognize they're pretty much necessary at this point. But even if necessary, why celebrate them so much? Why talk about them like there's some great thing when they're like, they're weapons created to kill other human beings. They're a necessary evil, but let's make sure we keep that in mind. I don't celebrate necessary evils. I just acknowledge that sometimes they're necessary. And no, I'm not afraid of the government turning on me. What am I going to do anyway? I'm also against celebrating war as this glorious and noble thing. War sometimes is necessary, but it's not glorious. It's not noble. I'm thankful for people who are willing to put their lives in danger to protect the innocent. They are noble. They are doing something noble. But the fact that we're at war in the first place, there's nothing glorious about it. We have failed as humans when we resorted to killing each other. So I hope you hear my heart in that. I am grateful for those of you that serve. And again, if you're judging me only on this podcast and haven't listened to episode 18, please go listen to it. And you'll hear a very different take that I gave for those who are choosing to stand that role and serve. But for the rest of us that are just normal people, like, I think we need to chill with our attitude about guns a bit and let it breathe. That's just my opinion. It is just my opinion. And if you disagree with me, we can still be friends. Why can't we be friends? Come on now. Why can't we? Whatever. The truth is, this isn't even that big of an issue for me. Like and I started the podcast this way. You might be like, oh, Pete's just on his soapbox arguing. I'm not that passionate about this. I got the question and I answered the question. I don't know. I can go both ways. I've been to shooting ranges and thought it was fun, like shooting at targets or skeet shooting. I was like, I get that. It's kind of fun. It's cool. So again, I'm not this like anti-gun guy. I do though wonder sometimes why Christians treat them as if they're like this glorious, wonderful thing to be celebrated, when really they're just kind of a part of our broken world that we have to deal with. Most importantly, though, we're called to love our enemies. I don't believe Jesus came to call any of us to war or incite violence. I think he came to undo that chaotic mess we created in our rebellion against God and his wisdom. So why go back? Why celebrate brokenness? Let's celebrate goodness. Let's celebrate peace. Let's celebrate people finding common ground and choosing to love. If violence is absolutely necessary to stop evil, so be it. Let's stop evil. But let's choose to celebrate that which is good, that which brings about fullness and goodness and health and healing in our world, way more than that which brings about violence and death. That's just my opinion. That is just my opinion. All right. But feel free to send me angry letters. Yeah, send me angry letters because nobody reads letters anyway. If you want to say positive things, email me at pete@risecitychurch.com. And if you have any issues or questions or thoughts, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to hear your feedback. It's okay. Maybe even if you're watching this on YouTube or something, you want to post a comment, go ahead. Keep it nice, keep it peaceful. But I'm certainly open to hearing from you and hearing your thoughts and anything you have to add to the conversation. Again, please like, subscribe, and rate if you get a chance. And look forward to more podcasts in the future. And I will give you more information about that New Testament survey class I'll be releasing. And side note, save this for the end. Next week, I am sending my manuscript for the book, Like Stars, to the editor and hoping to have the book released sometime in the next probably 3 or 4 months. So you'll be hearing about that as well. A lot of exciting stuff. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in, for hanging with me. Thank you for your grace. If you completely disagreed with me on this episode, but you're still my friend and love me, I love you as well. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again on the next episode of the Like Stars podcast. Thanks, everybody.
Consume me and I burn alive when you're near.